Hi, I'm Dr. Margaret Michelle Blackwood. I am the Chief of Breast Surgery at Robert Wood Johnson, Barnabas Health. I'm also the Northern Regional Director, and I'm also involved in clinical trials within the Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health System and CINJ. Today, we're very excited to present to everyone this great group of phenomenal women physicians who are dealing with breast cancer on a daily basis and provide excellent care throughout New Jersey. We're very excited also, particularly to talk about clinical trials, because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. And our patients are surprised sometimes when they find out, A, that they're a candidate for a clinical trial, and B, how fortunate they are to be part of that trial. So today, what I'm going to do is introduce you to our incredible panel of great physicians. And we're going to talk about some of the trials we have. We're going to talk about how to access these trials, and we're going to talk about all the ins and outs of clinical trials and breast cancer treatments. So the first one I would like to introduce to you today is Kathleen Toomey. Kathleen is one of our directors of medical oncology. She is on multiple campuses and has been in the Somerset community for a number of years. Kathleen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks to Komen for inviting us. And I'm the medical director of the Steeplechase Cancer Center at Robert Wood Johnson in Somerset, and I also work with physicians at RWJ Hamilton. So I'm happy to be here and research. I love research, so I'm happy to have this discussion.
Kathleen is very much involved in our research project, as are our other wonderful doctors here. And today we also have Dr. Miradula George with us. She is from Rutgers and CINJ. She's very involved in our clinical trials, and she is going to be one of our people to actually lead us through this discussion today. Miradula, can you introduce yourself today, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Komen, for having me here today. I'm one of the breast medical oncologists. I have my practice here at the Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey and New Brunswick. I also see patients at the Steeplechase Cancer Center. I work closely with the medical school, and I'm involved in clinical trials, both in early stage and metastatic breast cancers.
Thank you, Miradula. It is always good to have these introductions, I think, because people need to know where we're located. That we're not just a face on a screen nowadays. We do practice medicine. We do see patients. And speaking of that, one of my co-PIs on our I-SPY 2 trial, or I-SPY 2.2 now, Coral and I have been working together now for a number of years. Coral is based out of the CINJ campus in New Brunswick. And Coral, can you introduce yourself today?
Yes, thank you. I also want to say thank you to Komen for inviting me to this panel. I'm always excited to work with Komen for what he covers, especially in the October Breast Cancer Awareness Month. As you've heard from others, I'm also part of the RWJ Barnabas Health System. I primarily work at Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. I am a breast medical oncologist. I've been here now for a number of years. I do a lot of breast cancer research, both on the translational level as well as clinical trial research, both investigator-initiated and large cooperative clinical trials. So we are part of a health system that is fundamentally believes that clinical trials are one of the foundations of what we do to help our patients. And so I'm very happy to be here and participate in this panel today.
Thank you. And thank you to Komen, because without them, we couldn't produce such a great program today. So I'm going to kick this off with a few questions if I can. So I'd like to start with Dr. George. If you could answer for us, can you provide an overview of all the clinical trials, or at least some of them, for breast cancer that we have, and how they advance our research and treatments, and how it changes how we as physicians treat patients?
So patients and physicians all dream about that day when we can cure cancer. In order to achieve that dream, we need clinical trials. So clinical trials have been ongoing for many decades. And if you look at all the drug approvals between 2010 and 2020, just for breast cancer, we had about 30 drug approvals. And out of these, 26 of these were in metastatic breast cancers and 4 were in early stage breast cancer. And of the 26, approvals in metastatic breast cancer. Only one was for chemotherapy, and the rest were with targeted therapies, which have changed the landscape of breast cancers. So in order to achieve these drug approvals, we need clinical trials, and the FDA needs to approve these drugs so that they are available for commercial use. In order to do that, the drugs have to go through many phases. So first, they need to show some efficacy in animal studies, and based on those results, then they move on to phase 1 studies where they're studied in a small group of patients just to make sure that they're safe and to find the right dose. And if it is safe, that first phase then moves on to phase 2 studies where they're trying to see if there's any early signs of efficacy. And based on the phase 2 studies, then studies progress to phase 3, where it's done in a large group of patients, where patients get standard drugs and they're compared to new medications, and that's how drugs get approved. So we have clinical trials in various phases. We have clinical trials in stage 0 breast cancer that are open in different centers around the country. Then for early stage breast cancers, so patients with stage 1, 2, and 3 breast cancers, and also for metastatic breast cancers. And participation of these clinical trials is what leads to drug approvals. And it's helpful for the patients because they may have access to drugs that may not be approved in that setting. And by participating in the clinical trials, they're also helping patients who may get diagnosed with this disease in the future. So clinical trials is multifaceted. It needs a team effort. And we, as medical oncologists, have been doing clinical trials, and we try to provide opportunities for our patients whenever they can, because it benefits them and also benefits the whole community.
Thank you. That is a great, great overview. It is so true that we've come so far in breast cancer on the backs of others who did participate in trials. So we know that the only way to get this moonshot where we completely can cure breast cancer at any stage, I do believe, I think we all do, has to start with trials.
Yeah.
Dr. Omeni, can you tell me when, why, and how clinical trials for breast cancer are developed, and how do we identify patients? How do we recruit them? And what is the application process?
So thank you. So the clinical trials, which we all agree were significant improvements in breast cancer treatment, have all been made in the past many years due to findings from clinical trials. And this is a very complex, intricate process, right? It may seem overwhelming, but it really is broken down into different stages and different types. And, it behooves the patient to really discuss with your physicians and your oncologists what types of trials are best for them. For instance, Dr. Joyce has always gone through the different phases, how it gets to be, from preclinical stage, from animals and cells, all the way to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 into patients. But there are also different types of trials, right? So each type of trial is designed to answer different research questions that will help people, in the future, and also patients, hopefully, currently. So there are prevention trials. So in general, for people who do not have cancer or are at high risk for developing a new cancer, these studies look at cancer risk and ways to reduce that risk, for example, through diet, exercise, or medications. There are also screening trials, right? So this tests new ways to find disease early when it may be more easily treated. Does finding disease earlier before people have any symptoms save lives? Is one screening test better than another? These are all questions that screening trials try to answer. Then there also are quality of life, supportive care, palliative care type of trials, which look at ways to improve the quality of life of cancer patients to help reduce pain, nutrition problems, nausea, vomiting, sleep disorders, depression, etc. So that's another separate type of trial. But I think one of the trials that I think constitutes the majority of trials are the treatment trials, which we all participate in, right? So most breast cancer clinical trials are treatment studies that involve people who have cancer, like breast cancer. They typically would test new treatments such as new drugs, vaccines, approaches to surgery or radiation therapy, or combinations of treatments, even concurrent with radiation or a systemic treatment, different modalities. So treatment trials constitute the majority of the trials that we have to offer. It's important to know that our breast cancer trials don't offer just placebos. So I think that's one of the concerns patients have, is that they'll be offered placebos. It's usually in the context where that patient is also getting some standard of care treatment, and maybe we're trying to find if one treatment is better than the investigational agent. So our trials never use placebos. So the types of questions these trials are meant to answer is, what is the safe dose for the new treatment, for instance? How should the new treatment be given? Does the new treatment help people with cancer live longer? Can it shrink the tumors, prevent them from growing and spreading? What are side effects? And does it allow for a better quality of life? And so, knowing all the vast majority of trials that are there to, for the patient, there's one for everyone, right? So this is why patients should please discuss with their oncologist about what trial may be right for them. So oncologists, in direct communication with that patient, will counsel the patient on what trial they think that they're eligible for. And so they typically will determine whether the patient is eligible for the clinical trial among the plethora of treatment options. So patients should consider, in terms of enrolling in a clinical trial, should consider joining a clinical trial before starting or changing treatments. For instance, in early stage breast cancer, you want to start treatment before surgery in the event that that patient will need what we call neoadjuvant therapy, either by chemotherapy or by pill form, treatment that is meant to hopefully shrink the tumor and hopefully impact on survival before surgery. That typically occurs in early breast cancer, and so you want to start before that treatment before surgery. Or in the case of a breast cancer recurrence, maybe a local recurrence, there are clinical trials, because we don't have necessarily standard of care about how to treat a local regional recurrence. That's a very good opportunity for clinical trials. So that's another opportunity to enroll in a clinical trial. And of course, in the metastatic breast cancer setting, where we're trying to do our best to improve survival for patients with stage 4 disease. So typically, before the patient enrolls in the trial, they will want to discuss the risks, benefits, and the options of the clinical trial in detail with the doctor. And typically, we spend a lot of time, up to an hour, going to the minute detail, discussing the trial, so that the patient is well informed. And if the patient agrees, a written permission called an informed consent is then obtained with your signature, a copy provided to them, and then also for our medical records. And then that patient is now officially in a clinical trial and goes through all of the required steps outlined by the clinical trial protocol prior to starting the first day of treatment. And it's important to know that even though they might have signed informed consent, they are free to leave the trial at any time. Permission to join the study does not force them to stay in the study. And in terms of how does the patient know if they qualify, the things that the oncologist will take into consideration in conjunction with discussing with them is, for instance, the type of cancer they have, the stage, which is the extent of cancer they have, previous treatments they may have had in the past, the length of time since they had the last treatment, their lab test results, medications that they're on, medical conditions if they've had a history of cancer in the past, and also their the activity level, what was called the performance status, how physically fit are they to participate in treatment. So all of this is taken into consideration for patients to enroll into the trial, and then hopefully in conjunction with your doctor and discussions, if they agree, they sign informed consent, and then they can now start officially on the clinical trial.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Amani. I appreciate that. That was a very thorough overview. I think it's really important that patients understand that many times when they come in with the breast cancer diagnosis, the first doctor they really encounter, other than radiologists during diagnosis, is the surgeon. And it is the surgeons who are very much engaged in our system to look at the patient, look at the type of tumor they have, and kind of start bringing up the process of a trial. Because as you know, many of these trials are given to patients prior to surgery or in addition to the surgery. So what we do in our office is if I find a patient has a certain disease process that would fit into one of our trials, I do discuss in very broad strokes the trial that we have, the availability of that trial, and what that can mean for this patient. I think it's really important what you just said, that we don't give placebos, meaning that our therapeutic trials are meant to treat a patient. Some of us have a misguided idea that clinical trials means that they could get treated or not treated and they wouldn't know that. That is not the type of trial that we are talking about. Our trials are meant to be treatment trials, therapeutic trials. These women and men can be enrolled in maybe the latest, greatest medicines that haven't made it through the FDA yet, but that are available for cancer treatment. So I do believe that that requires quite a bit of education and discussion. It takes a lot of time on the part of all these doctors that are here today to have these discussions with patients. And speaking of other doctors, Dr. Anya Litvak has joined us today. She's in our Livingston campus. And Anya is one of our medical oncologists very much involved in our clinical trials. Anya, thank you for joining us today. Maybe you could also introduce yourself first, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood. So I'm a medical oncologist at Cooperman Barnabas Medical Center. I've been here for 7 years, very passionate about treating women with breast cancer, have a clinic dedicated to women living with breast cancer or having a history of breast cancer. And we've been involved with clinical trials for quite a long time.
So Dr. Litvak, how do you identify a patient, and how does a clinical trial fit into their actual care plan? Are there any risks with this?
So when a patient comes in to meet a medical oncologist, everyone is incredibly nervous about being here, especially seeing the medical oncologist, because that's the place where they may or may not need chemotherapy. So besides dealing with all their other health issues and the psychology of everything, we want to introduce clinical trials. And sometimes clinical trials are overwhelming for patients, and they feel that it's something that is for people who don't have any other options, and trying to have them understand that clinical trials may be offering the best of care, giving the highest quality of care through a clinical trial. So it's important to take that into account with also their preconceived notions and how they're doing psychologically with their diagnosis. So we utilize a lot of people in our health system to help patients get through or get introduced to clinical trials. So the first is our surgeons mention potentially a clinical trial would be offered to the patient. That's incredibly important because they get patients then understand that that may be an option for them. Most patients, if you ask them, are actually interested in participating, but have a lot of questions regarding what that entails. We then have the nurse navigator would be the first contact that they speak to. And once the nurse navigator sees that the patient may be interested or qualifies for a study, we have the research coordinators look through their information to see if they qualify. So this happens before I even meet them. And once I meet them, we actually discuss the clinical trial at that same time with standard of care to discuss the study. So it takes quite a team. It takes the research department, it takes the nurse navigator, it takes the surgeon, and it takes trust to be part of a study.
That's a great summation of how we work that in. Now, Dr. Toomey, I know you're involved intimately in many, many years of clinical research with patients, and they've really benefited from it. Can you tell me what can a patient expect about the timeline? Because some of the patients I know that I've tried to enroll in I-SPY 2 or 2.2 get nervous with the testing we have to do, the biopsies, the MRI, sending off their tissue to get a mammoprint. Can you address the timeline when it comes to preparing these patients for the therapeutic trial they're going to go under, whatever that trial may be?
So, yeah, I think when you have a diagnosis of cancer, the first thing you're thinking about is I need treatment yesterday. And, pushing through and we need to have time to have the patient understand what their diagnosis is, what their prognosis is, what their treatment options are, and letting them know that the option of a clinical trial is really, really an important option to have. We know that less than 5% of adults in this country are enrolled in clinical trials. We do also know that women have supported breast cancer trials for a long time. And the reason breast cancer is ahead of many other cancers is because of all the women who have gone before, and everyone stands on the shoulders of those that went before. And I think, Dr. Omeni and Dr. Litvak and Dr. George have, really explained that this is a team effort. It takes a team. So the surgeon, the radiation therapist, the medical oncologist, and very important member of the team is the research nurse. So explaining, what's going to happen, how long things will take, whether or not and how much extra things will happen under a clinical trial. So one thing you can rest assured on a clinical trial is that you're going to get standard of care and very possibly something better. So I think it's our enthusiasm when we offer the trial to a patient that really pushes the patient towards making a decision to join the clinical trial. But the research nurses really, in my mind, are the center, and they become, I call them the patient's angels. They watching over the patient. They're there with them every visit. They're making sure that all the testing is getting done. They're helping them along with the nurse navigators in getting things done correctly. So in general, it might take a little bit longer, but it's usually, I always say, urgent, not emergent to have the treatment. And you want to get the best treatment you can get. So that's what clinical trials offer our patients, the very best treatment that they can possibly get. So I encourage all of my patients to consider clinical trials, and I'm always very, very happy that the overwhelming majority do. And I think the idea of altruism is also very important because people really do want to help others. And they really do want to, I always say, listen, chemotherapy after breast cancer surgery initially was 2 years, and then it was a year, and then it was 6 months, and then it was 4. It got better and better and better because we kept moving the ball down the field. So, and then looking at, are they going to have extra things they have to do? So maybe there's more questionnaires, but people, once again, especially having that angel of a research nurse sitting next to them, they can get through it and they can do it. And it's always, I think, to their benefit and to the benefit of the population, of all of us.
I could agree with you. I think team approach obviously is the only way to do it. One of the things I do offer patients while they're undergoing, say, neoadjuvant chemotherapy in one of our trials is normally when I see the patient and then they would say, go to Dr. Litvak for chemotherapy for 3 to 4 months, and they come back to see me to discuss surgery, and then we schedule their surgery. But what I've done now, and any of our patients that are on trial, is I usually have them come back pretty much once a month, once every 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, just to offer support, maybe to elucidate explain some of the reports they're getting, talk to them about their MRI, show them their MRI, explain why they're having maybe a side effect or what we can do. Then I'll call Dr. Litvak or Dr. Wagner, or whoever the medical oncologist is, and even while I'm in the room with the patient, so that we can possibly brainstorm about how best to do this. Recently, we had a patient who'd had a gastric sleeve in the past, and she was on the I-SPY 2 trial and had a lot of pills to take. And she was having I think she had to take 16 pills in the morning. And that was a lot for her to take in this trial. By the way, she had a complete pathologic response. So for triple negative metastatic breast cancer, the nodes were very happy. But we did a lot of hand-holding during that time. We came up with a way how she could take the pills, what time of the day. We shared best practices we'd heard from other patients. I think these are all part of the support the patients undergoing a trial need to have. I think patients are unaware that there's so much support. I think also financially, they don't have to bear the burden of the medicines or the MRI or the mammoprint. other treatments are already paid for. So I think that is a benefit. So patients sometimes think if they don't have insurance, they can't participate, but of course they can. I do think it's important to talk about, we all work essentially under the umbrella of the NCI Designated Cancer Center, of course, CINJ, and it's the only one in New Jersey, as we all know. But Dr. George, maybe you could explain to us why it's so important to be treated under the umbrella of the NCI Designated Cancer Center like CINJ, and what that access to trials would be like, which would be different from other places.
So I know we've been talking about the importance of clinical trial, but being part of an NCI designated clinical comprehensive cancer center gives patients the opportunity to be part of clinical trials they would not otherwise have been presented. So we have trials that are run through the NIH, through CTEP, that are exclusively run through the ETCTN network. So we have early phase clinical trials, so like the phase 1 clinical trials that cannot be run at every cancer center. So we have options for phase 1 clinical trials. So these are drugs that are very early on in their drug approval process. So patients have access to that. Being an NCI designated cancer center, we are part of many cooperative groups, for example, ECOG or the Big Ten, a Comprehensive Cancer Research Consortium. So we have multiple clinical trials that are available through these cooperative groups. We have some of the national groups like NRG and SABP. So we have trials ongoing with them. So these are all potential options for patients. And through the RWJ Barnabas Health System, we are able to open these studies closer to where they live, as opposed to coming to New Brunswick for all these clinical trials. So in the last few years, we've been able to have clinical trials closer for our patients. So making it more accessible for the people of New Jersey. So getting cancer treatment at the NCI designated cancer center does change the management compared to getting it somewhere else.
I do believe that access is very important for people to understand that we really are a true NCI designated cancer center, and that we have the availability, and we have not just clinicians like all of us, but we actually have the people that back us up, meaning the labs and the actual people that have been sitting on these national boards and really have been there, grassroots efforts, applying real clinical information and cutting edge technology and medicines for our patients. And then we get to translate it for them. I think that's our job.
Yeah, and like Dr. Toomey mentioned, the research nurse, the research team, that's a large part of our infrastructure that is available for our patients. So that is something that's important for patients while they're going through clinical trials.
What do you guys, and I'll ask all four of you this, maybe you can give a quick thought about what you think about it. We need to make sure that we have diversity in our trials, meaning that we include patients that do not have access normally, and I don't mean just racial differences. I'm talking about economic differences, educational differences, heritage differences, because obviously we need to make sure that patients from all walks of life have access and are part of trials. Otherwise, we're just testing a certain population. And obviously, most of us don't think that's enough. You know, we need to make sure that these medicines and these that can work on everybody. And I'm going to go right around the room and ask everybody. And if I could start with Coral, what are your thoughts about it?
Yes, actually, I have a lot of thoughts about this. It's a passion of mine. So in general, before we talk about how we do it, just to give everyone, that will be watching, this idea of why it's so important to have diversity. It's important to have, clinical trial participation, that participants that are similar to the general population, so that any development of new drugs or interventions from these clinical trials are effective for everyone in the population, right? So trials need to ensure that there's adequate representation of gender, of age diversity, racial, ethnic diversity, as you also mentioned, economic diversity, all, the spectrum of our population. I think with gender, maybe more straightforward, is sort of embedded in the trial in terms of you must enroll both males, females, and however people choose to represent themselves, but they must be included. I think when it comes to age, for instance, there is unfortunately more of a passive sort of conscious bias, I would think, when patients are being considered for trials, for fear that they may not tolerate it or have side effects that make them more vulnerable. And at times, clinical trials may exclude these patients based on strict health criteria, and it leads to underrepresentation in trials. And we all know, and it's been published, that age diversity in clinical trials benefits both the patient experience and the success of the trial. When it comes to racial diversity, unfortunately, as Dr. Toomey mentioned, less than 5% of adult cancer patients are enrolled in the cancer clinical trial and the NCI. And out of that 5%, about 7% are Black or minority. And then out of that, speaking about breast cancer, Black women are like 1 to 3%. So all of this is dismal. And I think that, the reason why I'm just going to speak about, Black women for a moment is that we all know that horrible graph where Black women have up to 40% higher death rates compared to white women, where all the other ethnic groups are here with mortality and the Black women are here 40% higher. Right, and it's due to multifactorial reasons, right? One of them being that they tend to have the aggressive subtypes of breast cancer, and unfortunately, it is now the leading cause of cancer death, as opposed to others where it's lung cancer. For Black women, it is breast cancer that's the leading cause of cancer death. I can go on and talk about it. I don't want to take up too much time. I have more to say about it, including.
We could have a whole discussion on
Have a
this.
discussion about it.
I'd love to. I do want to have everybody give us just
I
a
want to
few
give
words on it.
And I can circle back again for
Right.
sure. But and also talk about why how I think we could maybe improve upon this. But yeah.
Anya, what are your thoughts about it?
I went into community practice because of this exact reason. I wanted to treat the community. There is a big difference of who can cross over, the bridge to go to other hospitals close by, and the people that we treat around here, because, and I feel that everybody deserves the best of care. And I think there needs to be a change of how we think about clinical trials. It is the best of care. It is the medication that you will get in 5 to 10 years. And it's being monitored very, very closely. So it's really a privilege and honor to be on a clinical trial. And I don't want it to, so if somebody can't afford to take a taxi over for 30 miles to be able to be part of a study, be a hindrance to be participating. So I think that by offering it close to home, that's the key of getting diversity. You have to trust your physician. You have to trust the staff that works around you and see that they're there to support you. There's a lot of bias that happens, including physician bias and research coordinator bias, for saying, oh, that patient won't be a good clinical trial patient. And I think that constantly we are surprised over and over again how committed people are, regardless of their skin color and their social status, etc. And so I love being part of Komen and Barnabas and CINJ for being able to offer these studies to everybody.
True. Good point. Very good point. Dr. George, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, we have a lot of clinical trials that are ongoing, and we routinely monitor looking at enrollment to see what ethnic groups are represented within these clinical trials across the RWJ Barnabas system. Today, these statistics that were released between 1998 and 2020, the death rates have gone down by 43% among all women. However, in African American women, the rates of the death rate is about 40% compared to other ethnic groups. And this is something that we have to consider as a network. How are we working to changing that for our patients? Are we able to make more trials available for our patients? What about screening? Are we able to reach out to these patient groups, especially in the inner cities, and make sure that patients are being screened appropriately? Obviously, prevention is better than cure. Are we able to catch any stage 0 breast cancer? Are we able to, treat stage 1 breast cancer more aggressively than having to treat stage 3 or stage 4 breast cancer. So it is a very important question that we have to continue to address as a group.
Thank you. And Dr. Toomey, what are your thoughts on the inclusion, diversity, and trying to get people from all walks of life to be part of trials?
So I think, yeah, the first thing is we celebrate our diversity in New Jersey, right? We're a diverse state. I think we're like the third most diverse state in the nation, and we have the most diverse doctors in the nation. So we're number one in diversity of physicians. So, okay, good. So we want everyone to have the ability to go into a clinical trial. So what happens when after a clinical trial and we have a new treatment, what do? We give it to everybody, right? So if we didn't have those people in the clinical trial to begin with, we don't know how it works in everybody.
Sure.
And maybe there are differences. So I think, and we all have unconscious biases. So we have to make it a conscious bias and make the bias in getting a diverse group of people into these trials, age-wise, gender-wise. I think, the men with breast cancer suffer, right? Because they're all alone in that little table in San Antonio by themselves. They don't have the advocacy of that they need. So age, gender, heritage, race, it's all important. So I have to say, Dr. Omeni and her passion, that she's helping, and we'll get many, many more African-American women in our trials because of her efforts. Thank you, Dr. Omeni.
Thank you all I love your passion. I love your enthusiasm of working with me in this endeavor, which just shows how great our health system is. We all have like-minded desire for our patients. And so it was so easy to come talk to each and every one of you, and everyone was just excited to get on board to help us in this effort. So thank you.
Well, everyone, this has been, I think, a great conversation. I think it's a starting point. I'm hoping we can educate a lot of people with this today. What I'd like to, in the last few minutes, is ask each panelist to share their actual final thoughts on what one takeaway, if it gets boiled down to one piece of advice, one clinical pearl, one something that a patient might take home today or when they're watching this, tell me one thing you would like them to know. Coral?
I want them to know just how important the clinical trials are, that there are people living longer today from cancer treatments that are the results of past clinical trials. That is an undisputable fact. And so they can only benefit, just as we've said today, they have nothing to lose. And so why not just discuss with your doctor if you're a candidate for a clinical trial?
I like that. Thank you. And Anya?
I would love for people to take away that clinical trial is the best of care, that it is offering medications that you would not otherwise get for many years, that you're monitored very closely. If they're not effective or cause side effects, we come off the study, and that the support that is offered for patients who are in clinical trial is massive, including their physicians, doctors, social workers, etc.
Perfect. Dr. George, words of wisdom.
Always look at what trials are available. If someone's diagnosed with cancer, always ask your physician if there is a clinical trial that is appropriate for you. They can always look at what trials are available within their institution, or anyone can go on clinicaltrials.gov to see what clinical trials are available within a certain geographical area. So always explore the option of a clinical trial and see if it is the best option for you, because it helps you, may give you access to drugs that may not be available for a few years, and you will help others who may get diagnosed with breast cancer in the future.
Excellent. And Dr. Toomey?
So yeah, I think echoing what everyone said, be open to options, get all your options, discuss the options with your physician and your healthcare team, because once again, it is a team. And I'm very excited about some of our trials which de-escalate treatment. So not too much, not too little, just right. So we're trying to get it I always say we're here, we're going to go here. When we're here, we're going to go here. And when we're here, we're going to go here. So we keep going up, we keep learning, and we keep curing more people with cancer.
Well, I thank you all. My last thoughts on clinical trials are there is an NCI designated website, as you know. People can actually do their own research. They can be their own advocate. If they're being treated at an institution in the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut area, Pennsylvania, I've had patients literally seek us out for certain trials, and we are all accepting patients and we're all looking for patients. And sometimes patients fit into those trials, sometimes they don't. I totally agree with the breast cancer. There's a lot of de-escalation when it comes to treatment, Kathleen. However, I also know that some of these trials, we might start with de-escalation and then we might escalate. So I think the beauty of some of these trials is that you're not just stuck with one plan that may or may not work for you. If it's not working for you, we can sometimes change to another plan. So I think the takeaway for me would be that patients should be open to clinical trials. They need to have those discussions to see if they want to be a part of those clinical trials. And they need to be in a place that have physicians that are dedicated, giving them the options, because a lot of places don't have the options we do. We're all thankfully very spoiled by having all these options. And I want patients to know that right down the street, I've had patients come that are the hospital next door, and they had no idea that we had these trials available. And somehow they came to me for a second or third opinion, and they found out, oh, I can be a part of that trial. And they're very thankful to be a part of that once they know. And I've had a lot of patients thank us for being available and being wide open to these kind of trials and the information. And even if they choose not to make the trial, I think the fact that they've had some choices helps give them some control back in their care. So I want to thank all of you. You're all amazing physicians. It's great to be a part of such a group. And I want to thank you all for being here today and being part of this and educating the public and educating me and each other. And just having this fellowship today, even though it's by Zoom, I think still works. So thank you very much.
I'm the director of the Cancer Center, designated by the National Cancer Institute.
I am too.
I am too.
We all are.
We all are. We're here to make an important distinction.
There are cancer centers.
And there are NCI designated cancer centers.
Offering the highest level
of research,
collaboration,
and positive impact on our communities.
By sharing our ideas
and pushing each other further,
we make the biggest breakthroughs
in treatments and therapies.
Getting these results isn't about us.
It's about you.
So if you or someone you love needs cancer care,
remember the NCI designation.
Because it does make a difference.
Because it does make a difference.
Because it does make a difference. There are NCI designated cancer centers all across the nation. In New Jersey, there's only one. Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey, together with RWJ Barnabas Health.
Hi, my name is Becky Carmichael, and I have breast cancer. First of all, with COVID, I skipped my first year ever of having a mammogram, and my doctor and my insurance company both let me know that I was overdue. When she sat me down after both biopsies and after the MRI and said, yes, there is cancer in that node, I think that's when it finally hit me. Oh gosh, now we're going to be dealing with breast cancer. Everything's kind of had to stop, and that's been a bit difficult. I miss my friends, my weekly coffee or tea or lunch with the group of women that I always went out with every week. Jim and I will be married 51 years next month. Sometimes I think I rely on Jim too much. He has been there from the very beginning. He sits in the bathroom to make sure I'm not going to fall while I'm in the shower. I mean, he's really taken really good care of me. I don't know if I could have a better caregiver. As soon as I got my diagnosis, that was one of my resources, is to go in and look at Susan G. Komen and see what's available and see other women that post things. There's other women that have been through things, and you really do learn a lot from what they've gone through. Take care of yourself, get your mammograms, don't count on feeling a lump. You're number one, so act like it and don't skip a mammogram. I would like to thank everyone for helping Susan G. Komen in the fight against breast cancer with your donations and your support. Thank you.